Picture a narrow crack in a hillside, deep underground. The oldest mine ever found on planet Earth was not dug for treasure. No light. The air is thick with red dust. Someone is down there on their knees, scraping at the rock with their bare hands and a sharpened stone, and the roof above them could come down at any moment. They are not looking for gold. They are not looking for iron or silver or anything you could spend or trade or forge into a blade. They are risking their life, in the dark, for a color. It was not dug for metal or diamonds or coal. It was dug for red. And the reason people wanted that red badly enough to crawl underground and die for it turns out to be one of the strangest stories in all of human history. When you and I hear the word mine, we picture a few very specific things: gold rushes and grizzled prospectors, coal and canaries, and men with lamps on their helmets, deep shafts and diamonds and enormous machines chewing into a mountain for copper and iron. Mining, in our heads, is about wealth, pulling something valuable out of the ground and getting paid for it. So it feels obvious that mining must have started that way too, that the first hole anyone ever dug was dug out of need or greed for something useful. That is the natural assumption, and it is completely wrong. To see why, we have to go to a hillside in a tiny country in southern Africa, and back further than almost anything else our species has left behind. The country is Eswatini, once called Swaziland. The place is a ridge that local people knew, long before any geologist showed up, as Bomvu Ridge, and Bomvu means red. In the 1960s, an archaeologist named Peter Beaumont, working alongside a remarkable self-taught researcher named Adrian Bouchier, began excavating a hollow in that ridge called Lion Cavern. What they found was not a natural cave. It was a hole that people had deliberately hacked into the rock. Later surveys estimated that at least 1,200 tons of ore had been carved out of that hillside, by hand. And they had not done it for metal. They had done it to reach a mineral that, ground to powder, gives up a brilliant, glittering red, hematite and specularite, the raw material of red ochre. When Beaumont sent charcoal from the deepest part of the dig to radiocarbon labs at Yale and in the Netherlands, the number that came back was staggering. People had been digging here around 43,000 years ago. Here is where it gets hard to believe. For decades, that date sat there, almost too old to accept. Then, in 2024, a team led by Brandy MacDonald and the archaeologist Gregor Bader, working through the University of Tübingen, went back with modern tools. They used a method called optically stimulated luminescence, essentially measuring the last time buried mineral grains saw daylight, and they analyzed 173 ochre samples from 15 Stone Age sites across the region. Their conclusion, published in the journal Nature Communications, confirmed it. Lion Cavern is the oldest known mine anywhere on Earth, worked for red pigment at least 48,000 years ago. Not a quarry someone stumbled into. A mine, the first one, and it was dug for paint. So we have to ask the obvious question: why? Why would people who had every reason to spend daylight hunting, gathering, and staying alive instead go underground, in the dark, and risk being crushed, for a color they could not eat, could not wear for warmth, could not sharpen into a tool? To answer that, you have to know what red already meant to them, long before anyone picked up a digging stone. Red ochre shows up in the human story astonishingly early. At Blombos Cave on the coast of South Africa, the archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood found something extraordinary in a layer dated to 100,000 years ago. A complete ochre processing workshop. Grindstones, hammerstones, bone, charcoal, and 2 abalone shells used as mixing bowls, still holding the residue of a red, paint-like paste. His 2011 paper in the journal Science described people who were deliberately manufacturing a substance, chemists essentially, tens of thousands of years before chemistry had a name. And what did they do with that red? They painted their bodies. They colored beads and tools. And over, all across the ancient world, they poured it into graves. Take one of the most famous burials in all of Europe. In 1823, in a cave on the coast of Wales called Goat's Hole, the geologist William Buckland uncovered a skeleton stained deep red, laid in the ground beside the skull of a mammoth. He assumed it was a Roman woman and named it the Red Lady of Paviland. He was wrong on both counts. It is a young man, and he was buried around 33,000 years ago, the oldest known ceremonial burial in Western Europe. his bones deliberately rubbed with red ochre before the earth closed over him. Nobody can read the mind of whoever did that. But the pattern repeats, across continents and across tens of thousands of years, and it is unmistakable. Red was not just a pigment. Red meant something. It stood in for blood, for life, for fire, for whatever people believed carried on after the body stopped. Understand that, and the mine at Lion Cavern stops looking strange. These people were not tunneling for decoration. They were tunneling for a substance loaded with meaning. Now, an honest story has to slow down here, because not every researcher agrees the ochre was purely symbolic. There is a real, ongoing debate. Some scientists, including the archaeologist Lynn Wadley, have shown that red ochre is genuinely useful stuff. It works as an ingredient in glue for fixing stone blades into wooden handles. It may have helped tan hides, shield skin from the sun, even served as a medicine or an insect repellent. So maybe people mined ochre for practical reasons and symbolic ones at the same time. Maybe the line between useful and sacred is one that we invented, and one they never drew. But here is what keeps pulling researchers back toward meaning. You do not need a mine to tan a hide. Ochre lies around loose on the surface in plenty of places. The fact that people went underground, specifically, for the glittering, sparkling, top-grade red, the specularite that shimmers like crushed mirror, suggests they wanted more than function. They wanted the good stuff, and they wanted it badly enough to risk the dark. For a very long time, tens of thousands of years, this is what mining was. Digging for color, for stone, for meaning. Because the next chapter, the one we usually think of as the beginning, does not start until much later. In Neolithic Europe, mining changes character. Near the town of Mons in Belgium, there is a site called Spienz, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, where farming communities between roughly 4300 and 2200 BC sank shafts up to 16 meters deep, the height of a 5-story building, straight down through the chalk. After what? Flint. Because in a world without metal, flint was everything. The material you made your axes, your blades, and your arrowheads from. Flint was the steel of the Stone Age, and Spienz is one of the largest and earliest mining complexes in all of Europe. And here the human detail becomes almost unbearably vivid. Cross the channel to Norfolk, in England, to a site with a wonderfully eerie name, Grimes Graves. The later people who found the 400-plus grassy pits could not imagine ordinary humans digging them, so they named the place after Grim, an old name for the god Odin. But it was not a god. Around 4,500 years ago, Neolithic miners sank those shafts, some more than 10 meters deep, to reach a prized black flint they called floorstone. And here is the part that gives me chills. They dug with picks made from red deer antler. Archaeologists have found around 150 antler picks in a single mine, some lying exactly where a worker set them down for the last time, 45 centuries ago. On the chalk walls you can still see the soot from their lamps, and in places, the marks of their fingers. You are looking at someone's last shift, frozen in the rock. Then, and only then, thousands of years after Lion Cavern, do we finally get the thing we assumed mining was about all along. Metal. In eastern Serbia, at a site called Rudna Glava, the archaeologist Borislav Jovanović excavated more than 20 ancient shafts, dug by people of the Vinca culture around 7,000 years ago, chasing veins of copper ore down into the hill. And they had worked out a genuinely clever trick to break the rock, called fire setting. You light a fire against the stone to heat it, then throw water on it, and the sudden shock cracks it open. That is not brute force. That is engineering. From there it is a straight line to the ancient Egyptians, who by 5,000 years ago were sending state-run expeditions. Hundreds of workers, soldiers, and scribes, deep into the Sinai Desert, to mines like Wadi Maghare and Serabit el Khadim, digging for copper and for turquoise. They even raised a temple out there in the desert to the goddess Hathor, whom they called the Lady of Turquoise. Mining had become an industry, run by a state, and blessed by a god. So look at the real order of events, and something flips over. We tell ourselves that mining began with greed, that the first hole in the ground was about wealth, or metal, or survival. But that is backwards. The oldest mine on Earth is not a copper mine or a gold mine. It is a paint mine, 48,000 years old, dug for a glittering red that these people could not eat and could not sell. Metal mining, the thing we picture, is the latecomer. It shows up tens of thousands of years after humans first crawled underground for the color of blood. That is not mining for survival. That is mining for meaning. The very first thing our species valued enough to risk death in the dark for was not treasure. It was a symbol. Lay the whole timeline back out, because the shape of it is the entire point. 100,000 years ago at Blombos Cave, people are already grinding red ochre into paste in abalone shells. By 48,000 years ago at Lion Cavern in Eswatini, they are cutting into the earth itself to reach the best of it. The oldest mine we know of, and it is for pigment. Only much later come the great flint mines of Neolithic Europe, Spians and Grimes graves, worked with deer antler picks. Around 7,000 years ago, at Rudna Glava in Serbia, people crack the rock with fire and water to reach copper, the first true metal mining. And by 5,000 years ago, the Egyptians turn it into a state enterprise in the deserts of Sinai. Pigment first, stone next, metal last. The exact reverse of the story we usually tell. And that instinct is still running inside you. Think about where red sits in your own life. It is the color of the stop sign, the warning label, the alarm, danger. It is the color of the heart on your phone, of roses, of love. It is the color of power, of the red carpet, a warning and an invitation at the very same time. 48,000 years on, we still cannot leave that color alone. And we are still sending people underground for materials we have decided matter. Right now, the copper and cobalt and lithium inside the very device you are watching this on came out of a mine, dug by someone in the dark. The tools have changed, the impulse has not. When those first miners crawled into Lion Cavern, on their knees, for a handful of shimmering red, they were not being primitive. They were being profoundly, recognizably human, willing to go down into the earth and risk everything for something that meant far more to them than it weighed. You would have understood them perfectly. All the research is linked in the description.